Awesome. Okay. Well, Danielle, thank you for coming. I'm going to take everything in me not to just have us talk about movies, TVs, and books for the whole episode, but I would love it.
That's the easy part.
Exactly. But to get us started, Danielle, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you started writing.
Let's see. So
go all the way to the beginning.
I know, right? I'm like, I just had one of those things where it's like, I've never not been a writer, which I think is a very writerly thing to say. But no, I first and foremost was a reader. I've always been a reader. But I've always written, whether it was in a journal or a diary, or it was actually writing a story or whatever. I've always been a writer. I was an English major in college. And then I immediately went into publishing and just never got out of it. So yeah, that's kind of where that started. And I think it was the longer I worked in publishing, the more I was like, oh, I want to write a book that I can really relate to and that I could see myself in. And not that there aren't books out there like that, but it was like, that was kind of the driving factor, I think, was actually working in publishing and being like, and seeing kind of how things have progressed and how much more they need to progress. And then sitting down and actually writing something. So.
Awesome. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what you did in publishing, because you just said you were in publishing, but what were you doing before?
Yeah, so right after college, I got an internship at Source Books, which is based in the Chicago suburbs, which is where I live. And I was a publicity intern. So I was working in the PR department. At the time back then, PR and marketing kind of overlapped. And while I was there, it really diverged. So that PR and marketing were separate. And since then, it has gone back to being kind of one big department. But yeah, so I was the person promoting books. And as an intern, when I was hired as an intern, that was the very first year that Source Books Casablanca, which is the romance imprint, started publishing romantic fiction. They actually published quite a bit of romantic nonfiction first, and now it has pretty much moved into all romantic fiction. And they really gave it to me as an intern project. They were like, here, figure out romance. Like, what do we need to do to promote romance books? They had no idea. And it was kind of through doing that they were like, oh, you can just stay because you understand what's going on. So yeah, I continued. I started out, as an intern, moved to assistant publicist and associate publicist, and all the way up to assistant publicity manager, which is what my position was right before I left. I think I've talked about this a little bit during book club, but I had a very difficult pregnancy. I had to go on bed rest. So I ended up actually quitting my job at Source Books and focused on being a mom for a while. And then after a couple of years of being a stay-at-home mom, I got very bored. And I love being a mother, of course, but I was a little squirrely. I was like, okay, here's this tiny person who is starting to gain independence, or at least wanted to gain independence. And I needed something to do. And my friend, Fresh Fiction, like I saw randomly, I don't even know if it was in an email blast or if it was in social media. I can't remember, but I saw you were like, we're looking for reviewers and maybe an assistant. And I was like, I can do all of this. And so then I was the editorial manager at Fresh Fiction for a few years, for almost 5 years.
Yeah, incredible.
And then again, I think it was on social media again, like on Instagram, one of our local independent booksellers, Anderson Books, which is in Naperville, Illinois. It's like an institution out here in Illinois. It's a great, great independent bookstore, but they were looking for an event coordinator to help out in the Department of Events. And the director of events actually worked at Source Books when I worked there. So everyone in publishing talks about how like insular it is. It really is. It's a very small world. And so, yeah, since about the end of January of this year, I have been the event coordinator at Anderson's Bookshop. I have worked events that had almost 1,000 people, like with Bob Odenkirk. That was actually my very first in-person event at
Mhm.
Anderson's. And then like a week later, we were in the bookshop with, you know, like a local author who literally had like 12 people show up. So it runs the gamut. It's a lot of fun too. And I
Yeah.
still, of course, co-host the podcast. So like you said, I have been on all sides of publishing, and now I'm an author. So I have like yet another side of the publishing dice, I guess you could say, that
What were some of like the lessons that you learned working behind the scenes in publishing that you were able to take with you into your publishing journey?
Just how little control like traditionally published authors have.
Mhm.
You know, I think, to be fair though, I should say, and we kind of talked about this a bit in our interview, and I've talked about it elsewhere, but I had more control than a debut author should have based on my knowledge of the industry. Like the amount of times I went back and had very nitpicky things, like I'm looking at the screen behind you and I can like just the font conversation that I had.
Is it triggering you? I'm very sorry.
It is, because I'm like, no, it looks great. That's what I'm like, look at how good it looks. And yeah, it was just, but that was really because I knew to look for those things, and I was able, and they took me seriously. You know, I have said this before, my cover was the thing that I was going to be a diva about, and I think it worked out. So
it's good to kind of set that goal in your head when you're pursuing any sort of creative venture to be like, what is the one thing I'll be a diva about?
Yes, totally.
Well, you mentioned that you've always been a big reader just as much as you've always been a writer. What was the first book that you remember loving?
The first book I remember loving. Oh my gosh, that is a great but also really hard question. Like, I think I'm trying to think. Wow, you may have stumped me, Gwen. I remember, you know what? I remember, I'll go like this route. In school, like the book I remember reading and really just like loving it at a different level, I think, was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. I think because it focused you know, Meg was the main character, and in science fiction, I mean, I think even as like, I think I read it in 5th grade, so I was 11, even that you knew that that was not normal. Like you even, I think even most of what we read in school dealt with mostly boys as characters, you know, what was considered like worthy to be taught in school or whatever. But yeah, I think that was like science fiction. I probably around that time was like when my dad and my brother were probably like really into Star Wars, and like I just watched it too and got really into Star Wars. So it was really cool to have like a science fiction or, you know, or fantasy-ish kind of book be focused on a young girl, which was really cool. So that's really probably, yeah, maybe A Wrinkle in Time. But I mean, we were always reading, you know, so I'm just like, all the classic, we would read all those like classic kids books and things like that too. So yeah.
I love that. Well, that's a good transition into your book, you know, being able to, the reason I'm saying that's a good transition is because I think one of the things that the Accidental Pinup does really well is it takes a story that is, you know, a love story that's familiar, but it still turns it on its head, and it makes these characters come to life and are so beautiful and lovely. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about what inspired Cassie and Reed's story and how, like what inspired their story.
Yeah. Oh, that's another good question that I don't really have a straightforward answer to.
The longer, the better.
I know. I'm trying to think of like where to even start, right? Because I think with a lot of debut novels, like your first book that you really finish and the one that gets picked and you know, you work on. I've written other books that I will never look at again, but this one was really, I don't know, it was one of those books that like came to me fully formed. Like I kind of knew the whole story from the start, but I wanted a story that reflected my own relationship. I'm a Black woman. I am married to a white man. We have had our fair share of like awkward conversations about things that completely go over his head that he just not pay attention to. But that's a lot of men, to be quite honest. But yeah, I mean, I wanted Cassie first and foremost to be confident. I wanted her to be, you know, she's a self-described fat Black businesswoman, and I wanted her to be that, but to be proud of that. I wanted her to be amazing at her job, and I wanted her above all, just to be confident and like know that she is so worthy of so much.
Yep.
But when I was like developing her, I was like, but she's too perfect.
Uh-huh.
What can we do to change this? Because she needs a story. And when I decided on her to become a photographer, which was just very like, ooh, could she be a professor? Could she be a social media person? Like, you know, it was just like all the things. And then when I landed on photographer, I was like, okay, what would make this amazing photographer tick? And it was like, oh, she'll be the model. It was like, she's not used to that. She knows she'd be a great model, but she's not used to it. So it's going to be awkward. And then I was like, what can we do to take it up a notch? And it was, oh, we're going to put her in lingerie. Perfect. It's great. Absolutely. You know? So yeah, so that's kind of where that started. And then specifically their relationship, it was kind of like the idea of doing a workplace romance, but that didn't quite feel like a workplace romance. So having him be a rival photographer and to them be kind of at odds in a professional way. And then for them to also be at odds in different ways, but then to work through all of that. That was kind of how their relationship started.
Yeah, because I love that their love story is, their relationship is like, we've talked about this on the podcast too, that they don't really hate each other. Like they really just really like each other. The fun and the joy is watching that relationship bloom. And it's like, I don't know, I guess I'm gonna say it's more of a comment than a question, but it's like, it's just so refreshing to see that, because it's important and it's mature.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, they don't like each other for like a chapter and a half,
right? Yeah.
Where they're like, what's with this person? They're very wary of each other, and they both have very good reasons to be. But they also are like, okay, wait, like you're great and you're great. Like, let's get over ourselves and, you know, hang out and other things.
I love it so much.
Yeah.
So, you know, I always think this is fun to ask, but I hardly ever do ask this question, but like, how do you feel about writing love scenes?
Marriage is the best part. And anyone who says they aren't, they're lying. They love it. Every romance author who writes open door sex scenes, it's the best. It's when I have writer's block, that's what I write. I write sex scenes. That's what I do. And like the most outrageous, you know, just over the top, like, and that's what gets me writing better again. Like, it's like, I don't know what it unlocks that says more about my subconscious probably than anything. But yeah, that is what I do. And it is, I think it's very fun. I have to say my launch party was this past Saturday, and Lana Harper, who has been on the Fresh Fiction podcast and lives in Chicago, and she's a Berkeley author, all the disclaimers, et cetera, et cetera. But she asked me that question, and like my daughter was like right here, like to me. And then thankfully, just the way they sat, I could not see my parents. They were like just outside of my peripheral vision. I knew like my mom and dad were there. My mom, I don't care. My mom is my beta reader. Half the time she says it's not sexy enough. But my dad hasn't, I mean, I think he's reading my book like right now. And I'm just like, cool.
You're like, please stop.
Get excited. No, don't get excited. That's weird. That just but you know what I mean? Like it is, but it is what it is. Like I think I've told everyone's like, it's sexy, get ready, you know. It's not after 8:30, Sarah. I hope they don't kick us out.
Nah.
But yeah, I think it's just it's one of my favorite parts. And like I did explain this at my event, and I've said this like in articles and things too, like sex is such an important part of a relationship. And I think if you are going to portray it in especially a romance novel, not erotica or even erotic romance, where it is much more about titillating than it is, but it has to move the story forward, you know. Right. So every sex scene comes at a part where they need that kind of that emotional and physical connection, you know, and in a real relationship, that's also kind of when that begins in your relationship too. So I think that that's important, you know, and you know, quite frankly, if sex didn't happen, none of us would be here, you know. Absolutely. Like at the most basic of levels. So like I said, I love writing them. They're fun.
I love it so much. And now I'm like, that's a new fun fact I didn't know about Danielle is unlock the writer's block with a little sex scene. Perfect. I was like, maybe I'll try that. It's a good idea.
I highly recommend.
Well, Danielle, we're going to switch now into our fresh facts portion where I just ask you some fun random questions. You answer them however you feel like.
Love it.
All right. So how important are tropes to your writing process?
Yeah. Like when I was writing this book, not important at all. But then the more I think it's like the more I grow as a writer, I do think about them more. And one of the things that I always take to heart is from the podcast Fated Mates with Sarah McLean and Jen Prokop, but they always talk about the promise of the premise. So like if you say it is going to be an enemies to lovers story, these two people have to hate each other and then figure out how to fall in love. You know, it's like almost you really have to like that's why I always kind of bristle when I see someone say my book is enemies to lovers, because like, no, they don't really hate each other. They have misconceptions about one another. So that's why I call it rivals to lovers. And I actually like have convinced our PR and marketing, my publicist and marketing people to like start saying that more, because I was like, this doesn't follow through on enemies to lovers. So yeah, so I think tropes are important, but I also like when people take them and twist them in a way. So I think they are very good guidelines, but I don't like being beholden to something so much that it ends up overtaking the story. So it's like I don't know, it's like something I do take into consideration, but then I also am just going to write the story that I need to write.
Is there a favorite trope that you have that you like to read?
To read, I do really love enemies to lovers, but I'm like, but no, I don't love when they like really like they're very mean to each other. Like, you can be enemies in different ways, but like when people are like viscerally mean to one another, like it really like kind of turns me off. But I also understand why people love that tension. Like I think that has a lot to do with that trope. But another one of my favorites is Grumpy Sunshine, where somebody is very grumpy and then the other person is it's opposites attract, but it's like heightened when it's Grumpy Sunshine. So yeah, that's really a fun one. I'm trying to think of what else. I like second chance romance quite a bit because the feelings are like already established. And so I think it's kind of fun to like examine those feelings, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I always love that one too, for sure. What is your favorite time of day to write?
Oh, I'm the worst. I write either very early in the morning or very late at night. So it's like, so I sleep for like 2 hours. When I will drafting, it's like it has to be like 11 o'clock when I actually get going. And then, but then I'm like, oh, I think it's my brain is like, no, you need to write more. You need to keep going. You need to finish that thing or whatever. And so then I'm up at like 5 or 6 in the morning writing, which is wild. But yeah.
Manically writing.
Yeah. During the day is when I do my best revising. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm hopped up on so much caffeine, but I don't know what that says about me.
And what's your favorite time of day to read?
All day, if I could, but I can't. So no, I actually read kind of like first thing in the morning when I'm working out, which is a very slow jog. And I jog very slowly so I can read while I do it.
I love that so much. It's my favorite. Okay, so what is a new hobby or practice that you've picked up recently?
What is a new hobby? Recently, nothing. I don't have time, Gwen.
I know that was a rude question. I was like, I know for a fact that you have not had time to do that.
I don't have time to do anything. I think I've talked about this, but I started watercolor painting during the pandemic. That was my pandemic hobby. And that is what I do. When I have time, because it is like the thing I like about watercolor painting is it goes very quickly, it dries fast, like it's there, you're done, it's great, but it can be time consuming, like, you know, especially when you start layering. Like I've been trying to be more ambitious in my watercolor painting, and then you have to layer and you have to wait for it to dry. And it's like, oh, I could go get my hair dryer, or I could get one of those little heat dryer things that I should buy one. I haven't. But yeah, but I do enjoy watercolor painting. In fact, I'm like, I keep looking up because everyone knows my calendar is up there, and I keep looking up because I'm like, when can I paint again?
Oh.
I don't know why. I don't know when, because I just got revisions back, so I have to go through those. So I don't know.
Like, one day in October, I'll be able to paint.
It'll definitely be, maybe once school starts for my daughter, I'll have a little bit more time. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a very important question, Danielle. Yeah. Who was your first book boyfriend or girlfriend?
Oh, it's Joe, or not Joe, Lori, but maybe Joe too, in retrospect. I think really I liked Joe most of all, but Lori from Little Women, even though I recently reread parts of Little Women. I did a full read through, I think that first summer of the pandemic. And I was like, Lori's kind of the worst.
He's the worst. Yeah.
He's not great.
No.
But I also still was like, but I love him. So yeah.
But we love him. And now that I'm like, oh man, as anyone knows, Danielle and I can talk about Little Women until we're like blue in the face. But I'm like, oh, to your point, maybe the reason we really love Lori is that we're seeing the love that he has for Joe, but really it's because we love Joe so much.
I think that's what it is. I think that I have some like deep harbored crush on Joe, and I just wasn't letting myself admit to it. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Us, just like Lori, we all love Joe.
Yeah, exactly. But if you think about it though, Professor Bear, not all that much better. I mean, he's like this poor German professor. So. Yeah.
The only difference is he lets her write. Like, cool.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What is your favorite writing fuel?
I have my glass of wine, because when I used to come regularly, I always came with like a very full glass of wine. So that's why I have my wine. But it's probably, I go between wine, and then it's a constant struggle. Gwen knows this. I'm always trying to not drink coffee. I don't even know why deprive myself. But I do drink a lot of tea, like a lot of just English breakfast with either a little bit of milk or a little bit of honey, never both at the same time. I'll do either or, and then, or Earl Grey just by itself. That's what I do.
Man, I love that. Okay. So this, you just had the opportunity last week with your release week, but how did you celebrate your new release?
My favorite celebration was like kind of on Tuesday. So someone at some point along the way, I don't even remember when, but said, don't schedule your big signing for your actual release day, because you are running high in emotion. You are going to crash and burn. You will probably cry in the middle of your event. So don't, like, someone said that. Now I know plenty of people who've had their launch parties on their release day. I'm not like saying, so why did you do that? Like, no, but I did follow this advice. And so I went to Anderson's, where I work, which was very great to go and like sign the books and see it on shelf. And my coworkers made me take a lot of dorky pictures.
Yay!
And then I went to my local Barnes and Noble, and they were actually busy. So I didn't talk to anyone, because every time I looked up, like someone was talking to a customer or whatever, they were running all over the place. And so I just like stealthily signed like the one copy, and I think they had just put it out really. And so I just signed it. But then I went home, and I had a giant Rice Krispie treat that I had from my Noodles and Company lunch.
Yum.
So I saved it, and I had 2 very full, like red wine glass full of champagne. And that is how I celebrated.
I love that.
Yeah. And kind of just sat and continued to go through social media, because that first day, I was just on my phone. It was wild.
Did you feel in that day that you did have all those high emotions?
Yeah, no, I would have been a mess. I would not have been able to have answered I have to give props to Lana Harper, because she had absolutely incredible questions, and I would not have answered any of them coherently if I had done it on Tuesday. I would have been like, what did you ask? It's my book day. Like that would have been my answer the whole time.
It's my book day. Every answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is some advice that you would give to your younger self?
Oh gosh, stop paying attention to everyone else because they don't care. No one, like, you know what I mean? Like thinking of like, I was so wrapped up in what everyone else was thinking about me, and no one cared because they were all the same. They were all doing the exact
same thing in their heads.
I would say just be your weird little self and don't worry about what everyone else thinks, because in 20 or whatever years, you're going to be in the author that you've always wanted to be. So
exactly. Yay. I love that advice. That's great. Okay. Danielle, at this point, are you a pantser or are you a plotter?
I'm a plotter. You know this. I plot books to the point where I have to stop. Wait, let me see. I may have it right here. I have a folder that literally says writing on it. It means nothing, but yeah. Okay. So when I plot, I handwrite it, and this is, let's see, wait, this is 8 pages front and almost all the way back. It's like, I have to stop myself. And it's usually when I get to like 8 pages, like, hey, you need to write the book. Stop describing it.
Like, but I don't want to, I'm not ready.
Exactly.
1 more page.
So yes, no, I'm a plotter. I will always be a plotter. Every so often I will have like a very specific scene that pops up into my brain that'll be like out of order that I will write most of, but I almost always like start to finish, like chapter 1 to the end. That is what I do. Yeah.
I love that so much. All right. So the Accidental Pinup takes place in Chicago.
Yeah.
And you also live in Chicago. It's interesting how those two things work that way. What is one must do in Chicago?
How do I explain? I'm going to say, every time you see something that looks good to eat it.
Because I love that.
Chicago is a really amazing town for food, whether it is like street food or it is very high end, Michelin star restaurants. It's got it all. And you just, eat. There are companies that do like food tours they do it in most cities, but I mean, I think I would even pay for a food tour of Chicago, because that would you need like a week and a half, but
I think I just figured out what you're going to do for your second book, what you're going to tell us about right now.
So my second book actually deals with quite a bit of food. I've had too much caffeine today. My eye is twitching. I'm not like crying. No, my eye is really bizarre.
I'm sorry.
Like I said, I've had too much caffeine. But yeah, the second book is related to, I didn't do this either. I didn't do like the thing where I should hold up my book is here.
Your beauty. There she is.
Very pretty. But yeah, it is Cassie's, one of her best friends and co-workers at the boudoir company named Sam, and then the hero Reed, his younger brother, and his name is Russ. And yeah, Russ works at a restaurant, and so he is kind of helping lead the team. The restaurant is going to have a food truck that is going to go to all of the different street festivals in Chicago, and the photography studio takes an old Greyhound bus and converts it into a photo booth bus that is also going to go to all of the street festivals, and they are always nearby each other. I wonder how that happened. And yeah, but the street festival circuit, I mean, that is something about Chicago, is during the summer, every weekend, mostly for free or for a very, very small fee, you can get into these street festivals, and they run the gamut from something as big as the Taste of Chicago or Lollapalooza, which, yes, we consider Lollapalooza a street festival.
That's wild.
All the way down to like just basically like a neighborhood block party, but anyone who's walking by can join in the fun. And craft festivals and flea markets and things like that. It runs the gamut. But yeah, so they're kind of making the rounds at all those street festivals, and the two of them they're very much opposites attract. They're very grumpy sunshine. And they they, for reasons, have a summer fling because one of them may or may not be leaving or thinks they're leaving. It's a whole thing. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, I love food trucks. Food trucks are so interesting to me because I'm just like, they're so small and yet you make great food. How does this happen? And then, yeah, the idea of a photo booth, you know, you see like the old camper vans that get converted into these photo booths that go around to weddings, but I just took that idea and made it bigger. Yeah, so it's like a summer novel. It's a lot of fun. I think it's slightly sexier than book one, maybe a little bit. And yeah, I had a great time. I wrote it the summer, really like the summer of 2020 and into 2021. I worked on this one for a really long time. But I was writing the summer that I didn't get to have. And growing up, like kind of in my early 20s and throughout, me and my friends, we would go to all of as many street festivals as possible. So yeah, so it's really cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, before I turn this over to our readers for some follow-up questions, where can viewers find out more about you and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, you can go to daniellejacksonbooks.com. I'll put it in the chat. I have it right here. I have a newsletter that you should sign up for, but I have not sent it out yet. And no one has yelled at me otherwise. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm also mostly on Instagram and Twitter at djacksonbooks. So
awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Danielle, so much. This was so much fun. Time flies when I'm chatting with you every time.
Oh.
And thank you so much for staying for a few more questions from our readers.
Of course. I see there is one in